"We're postponing your surgery," the hospital called. "Your insurance was canceled." I'd been waiting 8 months for a kidney transplant. My dad had canceled it to teach me a lesson after an argument. I didn't panic. I called my lawyer. When Dad was charged with, "My name is Edward Hale, and I'm 33 years old." 8 months into the wait for a kidney transplant, the hospital called me and said, "We're postponing your surgery. Your insurance was canceled." I was already packed. I was already trying not to breathe too hard because stress makes everything worse. And the worst part was that I knew exactly who did it. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story really resonates with you. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. To understand how we got there, I need to take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Georgia, about an hour outside Atlanta, in a house that looked normal from the street. 2 cars, trimmed hedges, a basketball hoop that nobody used. Inside, everything ran on my dad's mood. My father, Raymond Hale, liked to call himself old school. What he meant was that he believed respect only flowed one direction, down. My mom, Denise, worked as a dental assistant for years and then moved to front desk work. She was the kind of person who apologized when someone bumped into her. She learned early that the fastest way to survive my dad was to smooth things over and keep the peace. And then there was my younger brother, Jason, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, even when he was actively doing wrong. Jason and I were only 2 years apart, but it might as well have been 2 different families. When I got a B on a math test in middle school, Dad called it lazy. When Jason got a C, Dad said the teacher was out to get him. I was the kid who knew how to change a tire at 16 because Dad made me do it. Jason was the kid who got a new set of tires because he needed reliable transportation. The first scene I can still see like a screenshot happened when I was 15. I'd saved up from mowing lawns, and I bought a used Xbox off a senior at school. I was so proud of myself. I brought it home and set it on the kitchen table like it was a trophy. Dad took one look and asked, "Where'd you get money for that?" I told him. I said, "I worked for it." He didn't smile. He said, "So you think you're grown now?" Then he walked into the living room and called Jason over. He pulled out his wallet and handed Jason 2 crisp 20s and said, "Go get yourself something too. Don't be jealous of your brother." Jason wasn't jealous. He was smug. And I learned something that day that I didn't have words for yet. In our house, my effort wasn't something to praise. It was something to exploit. There was one person who saw it and said it out loud. My Aunt Lorraine, my mom's older sister. She lived in Atlanta, ran a small bookkeeping business, and she was the only adult who ever looked my father in the eye like he was just a man, not a storm system. She wasn't loud. She wasn't dramatic. She was steady. She would watch a family gathering the way an accountant watches a ledger, and later she'd say, quietly, "That didn't sit right with me." When I was 17, I got a part-time job at an electronics store. I liked it immediately, not because I loved selling TVs, but because I liked solving problems. I liked explaining why one laptop made sense for a college student and another was overkill. I liked helping older customers move their photos to a new phone without making them feel stupid. Dad hated it. He wanted me to learn a trade, the kind he approved of, the kind that sounded tough when he bragged about it. But I stuck with the job, and after high school, I didn't go off to some 4-year college with dorm life and frat parties. I stayed near home, took classes at a community college on and off, and worked full-time. I moved into a small apartment in Atlanta when I was 22, and it felt like breathing for the first time. That's when the health stuff started to become my whole life. I'd always been the skinny kid who got tired easily. I'd always had weird swelling after long shifts. I told myself I just needed more sleep, more water, more iron, more discipline. Then I had a morning where I stood up from my bed and blacked out for a second. I woke up on the carpet with my cheek pressed into it like a reset button had been hit. I went to urgent care. Then I went to a specialist. Then it was a nephrologist saying calm words that didn't feel calm. Chronic kidney disease. Not a maybe. This is what's happening. At first, I tried to keep it quiet. Because in my family, vulnerability wasn't met with care. It was met with commentary. When Dad found out, he didn't hug me. He didn't ask how I felt. He said, "What did you do to yourself?" Like kidneys are something you break with bad attitude. Jason, meanwhile, acted like my diagnosis was a new way to win points. He'd show up at dinner and say things like, "Man, I'd donate if I could, but I can't miss work." He was between jobs at the time. Still, I tried. I kept showing up for family things. I kept being the responsible one. Because I still had this dumb hope that if I did enough, I'd finally earn the kind of love that didn't come with conditions. My adult life became this strange blend of normal work and medical math. I sold electronics at a mid-sized store in Atlanta, and I was good at it. I wasn't some slick used car guy. I was the person customers asked for by name because I actually listened. On paper, I should have been fine. But dialysis and appointments aren't cheap, even with insurance. And time off isn't free when your body is already charging interest. Here's where my dad got his hook into me. When I was diagnosed, I was still on my dad's insurance plan through his job. He'd been at the same company long enough that he had decent coverage, and keeping me on it, at least for a while, was possible. Dad framed it like generosity, like he was rescuing me. He sat me down and said, "I'll keep you on my plan. You'll pay me back for the extra premium. That's fair." I was exhausted and scared, and I wanted stability. So I agreed. At first, it was $280 a month. Then it became $325 because rates went up. Then it became $400 because you don't understand how benefits work. Every time I asked for paperwork, Dad got offended. "Do you not trust me?" he'd say, like my survival was supposed to run on blind faith. I paid anyway. I set up a monthly transfer. I wrote insurance in the memo line like it was a prayer. I didn't realize I'd basically handed him a remote control. Meanwhile, Jason's life was a constant emergency. He needed help with rent. He needed help with a car payment. He needed help because his girlfriend was mad and he needed to clear his head in Miami. Yes, really. And every time Jason was short, my parents turned toward me like a drawer labeled miscellaneous funds. I remember one specific moment. It was a Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. I had a dialysis session the next morning. I was already tired, already foggy. Dad sat at the kitchen table and said, "Jason's transmission blew. He needs $2,000. I said I didn't have $2,000 just sitting around. Dad smiled like he'd caught me lying. "You have a savings account." I said, "That's for medical stuff." He leaned forward and said, "This is family stuff." That sentence followed me for years. The idea that my life was optional if it conflicted with Jason's convenience. I sent $1,200. I kept the rest. I felt guilty even though I shouldn't have. Another time, my mom called crying because their water heater died. I paid $950 for a new one. 2 weeks later, Jason posted a picture in a club with a caption about celebrating life. I swallowed it. Again. And then, because life has a dark sense of timing, I finally got the call that mattered. A kidney became available. Not a guarantee, but the step that turns waiting into motion. I'd been on the list for 8 months. 8 months of being careful, being tired, trying to stay stable, trying not to get sick, trying not to let my job slip. 8 months of pretending it didn't crush me every time someone said, "Stay positive." The hospital scheduled me for the transplant. The coordinator spoke in that practiced, calm voice that tries not to scare you. I took the day off work. I arranged a ride. I even cleaned my apartment like you do before something huge, like tidying up is a way to control fate. 2 days before surgery, my dad and I had an argument. It wasn't even about the transplant. Not directly. Jason had gotten into trouble again. He'd signed a lease he couldn't afford. His roommate was moving out. Jason needed someone to co-sign or he'd be homeless. My dad called me and said, "You're going to co-sign. Your credit is good." I said no. I didn't yell. I didn't insult Jason. I said, "I can't take that risk. I have surgery. I have medical bills. I can't be on the hook for his rent." Dad went quiet in that way that always meant punishment was loading. Then he said, "So you're choosing yourself over family?" I said yes. This time, yes. There was a pause. Then he said, "Fine. Learn what that feels like." He hung up. I went to bed thinking he was just angry, that he'd send some guilt texts, that my mom would call and do her "let's all calm down" routine. Instead, the next afternoon, the hospital called me. "Edward," the coordinator said, and her voice sounded careful. "We need to talk about your insurance coverage." I remember gripping the edge of my couch so hard my knuckles went white. I said, "What about it?" She said, "We ran the final authorization, and your policy is showing as canceled. Effective immediately." I felt the room tilt. Not dramatically, like in movies. More like my brain couldn't decide which reality it lived in. I asked, "Canceled by who?" She hesitated. It shows as terminated by the primary policy holder. My dad. 8 months of waiting. A donor organ. A surgery date. And my father had reached into my life and pulled the plug like he was turning off a light to teach me a lesson. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I didn't even cry right then. I said, very calmly, okay, don't release the organ to someone else yet. Give me 10 minutes. She said, Edward, we can't hold. I understand, I said. Just give me 10 minutes. Then I called my lawyer. Yes, I had a lawyer. Not because I'm some rich guy. Because Aunt Lorraine had insisted 2 years earlier that I stop treating my life like a handshake deal. She had watched my dad control the insurance payments, watched him demand money without receipts, watched my mom shrug like it was normal, and she said, you need someone in your corner who doesn't get emotionally blackmailed. She connected me with a lawyer named Priya Desai, a calm, sharp woman in Atlanta who handled a mix of contracts, civil disputes, and what she called family financial messes. Priya had helped me set up basic protections, a documented record of my payments to my dad, a written agreement that those payments were specifically for maintaining my coverage, and an authorization on file with my providers that my father had zero decision-making power over my care. At the time, I thought it was just being organized. Now it was a lifeline. Priya answered on the second ring. I said, my dad canceled my insurance. The hospital just postponed my kidney transplant. There was a pause. And then she said, do you have the cancellation notice? I said, not yet. She said, you will in 5 minutes. Check your email. And don't call your dad. Don't warn him. We move fast. Within minutes, Priya was on the phone with the insurance company's escalation department, and I was on hold with my transplant coordinator, and Aunt Lorraine was driving to my apartment because she could tell from my voice that I was trying to stay too calm. Here's the thing my dad didn't understand about me. He thought my calm meant weakness. He thought it meant I'd fold. My calm was me going into problem-solving mode the same way I did at work when a customer's laptop died 5 minutes before their flight. Step 1, facts. Step 2, documents. Step 3, consequences. The insurance company emailed confirmation. Policy terminated. Initiated online. The account login used, mine. Not my dad's. My stomach dropped, but it also clarified everything. My dad hadn't just canceled the policy. He'd logged into my account or used my information to do it under my name, so he could claim later that I did it to myself. Priya's voice was steady when she said, this is identity misuse. At minimum, possibly fraud, depending on what else we find. Aunt Lorraine arrived and sat across from me at my little kitchen table. She didn't ask if I was okay in a dramatic way. She just said, hand me your phone. She started going through my recent texts and emails like she was building a case, because she was. I told her about the fight. I told her my dad's line. Learn what that feels like. Lorraine nodded like she'd expected it. He finally did it, she said quietly. Priya filed an emergency request with the insurance company to reinstate coverage based on unauthorized account access and a pending life-saving procedure. She also contacted the transplant center's legal liaison, because yes, big hospitals have those. And yes, they take someone maliciously interfering with coverage for an organ transplant very seriously. By that evening, the insurance company had temporarily reinstated the policy while they investigated. It wasn't guaranteed. It was basically a legal duct tape solution, but it was enough for the hospital to move forward. I got my transplant. I'm not going to describe it in some dramatic medical way, because that's not what this story is about. What matters is that when I woke up afterward, groggy and sore and alive, I had one clear thought. My father tried to put me in the ground over an argument, and I was done. While I recovered, Priya kept working. She got the audit logs from the insurance portal, the IP address, the device signature, the timing. She subpoenaed what needed to be subpoenaed. She did what lawyers do when someone thinks they can hide behind family. The evidence was embarrassingly simple. The cancellation was initiated from my parents' home internet. At a time when I was at work, on camera, selling a guy a dishwasher and explaining warranty options. And the password reset that allowed access to my account? It was done through a phone number that hadn't been mine in years. It was my dad's. He had added his number to my account for emergencies back when I first got sick, when I was overwhelmed and signing whatever forms were put in front of me because I was terrified. He kept that access, quietly, and he used it. Priya laid it out like a menu of consequences. Identity theft or unauthorized access. Insurance fraud if he made false statements. interference with medical care if the prosecutor wanted to go there. And then there was the civil side, breach of agreement, financial exploitation, emotional distress. I kept thinking, stupidly, about how my dad always acted like he was the smartest guy in every room. Turns out he was just the loudest. The turning point, the public one, happened a month later at my dad's birthday dinner. It was one of those big family gatherings at a nice steakhouse in Atlanta where everyone wears their refined costume. I almost didn't go. I was still healing. I was still adjusting. I still had a lot of follow-up appointments. But Aunt Lorraine said, if you don't go, he controls the narrative. If you go, you control your boundaries. Before we walked in, I want to ask you something, because I know how the comments usually go on stories like this. What would you do if someone did this to you? Would you cut them off immediately? Would you try to talk it out? Would you forgive because it's family? Tell me, because I genuinely want to know where people land on this. Also, if you're still watching, you already know where this is heading. So yeah, like and subscribe if you want more of these family meets consequences stories. We walked into the restaurant and my dad was already performing. He stood up when I entered. He opened his arms like a hero welcoming home a soldier. He said loud enough for half the room to hear, "There's my boy. Look at you. God is good." People turned. People smiled at me with that pity-pride mix, like I was a charity project that had turned out okay. Jason was there too, of course, sitting close to Dad like a loyal sidekick. He raised his glass and said, "To Ed, for making it through." He didn't look me in the eyes. My mom's eyes were shiny. She hugged me too tight and whispered, "Can we just have a nice night?" That phrase, the peacekeeping spell. Dad tapped his glass with a knife and started giving a little speech. About family, about loyalty, about how when things get hard, you find out who shows up. Then he said, and I swear I can still hear it, "Some people try to run from responsibility, but I taught my son the value of consequences." That was his little wink to the argument. Like he was proud. I didn't stand up. I didn't yell. I didn't flip a table. I took a breath. I looked at the faces around the table. Aunts, uncles, cousins. Some I liked. Some I barely knew. All of them part of the same system that taught me to swallow things. Then I said, calmly, "Dad, tell them how you supported me during the transplant." Dad smiled, eager. "I did what any father would do," he said. "I handled the insurance, the paperwork." I nodded like I agreed. Then I said, "Tell them why the hospital called to postpone my surgery." The smile stayed on his face for half a second too long. He said, "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table to him. Screen facing up, showing the email. Policy terminated. Initiated online. Login audit pending. Temporary reinstatement due to suspected unauthorized access. Then I placed printed copies on the table. Priya had prepared a packet like it was a business meeting, because to her, it was. Aunt Lorraine spoke up, still calm. "Raymond, the cancellation was done from your house internet, using Edward's account access. We have the logs. We have the timestamp." Jason's face went pale in that specific way people do when they realize they're in the splash zone. My dad's voice went hard. "This is a private family matter." Priya wasn't there in person, but her presence was. Because the last thing in that packet was a letter from her office addressed to my father, formally notifying him of legal action and advising him not to contact me directly. My mom's hand flew to her mouth. She whispered, "Raymond, tell me you didn't." My dad did what he always does when he's caught. He pivoted to anger. He slammed his hand on the table and said, "He was disrespectful. He needed to learn. He thinks he can say no to family and still get benefits." I was teaching him. And then he stopped, because he realized what he'd just admitted. In front of everyone. The table went silent like someone had turned off sound. I leaned forward and said, "You tried to cancel my insurance 2 days before my transplant. Over a cosign request. That wasn't a lesson. That was control." My cousin Melissa, who I hadn't spoken to much in years, said quietly, "Oh my God." My uncle stared at my dad like he was seeing him for the first time. Jason looked at his plate like the mashed potatoes could swallow him. Dad pointed at me and said, "You're making me look bad." And I said, "You did that yourself." We didn't stay long. We paid our share and we left. I didn't storm out. I just walked out because I wasn't a kid anymore waiting for permission to exist. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. My phone blew up with messages that weren't about my health. They were about family unity. They were about forgiveness. They were about, "Your mother is stressed." Jason sent a text that said, "You didn't have to go that far." Like I'd committed the crime. My dad left a voicemail that was half rage, half manipulation. He said, "After everything I've done for you, you're going to destroy your own father?" I didn't call him back. I forwarded it to Priya. The legal process took months. It wasn't cinematic. It was paperwork and meetings and phone calls and waiting. But it was real. The district attorney's office picked it up because of the medical context and the documented unauthorized access. My dad was charged with identity theft-related unauthorized access and insurance fraud-related misconduct tied to the cancellation attempt. I'm not going to pretend I enjoyed that. It made me sick in a different way, but I also didn't rescue him from it. Because this is the part people don't like to say out loud. When someone has spent your entire life teaching you that consequences are for you and not for them, letting them finally face consequences is not cruelty. It's balance. Priya also helped me separate my life from my dad's grip completely. I got my own insurance in my own name, with my own access controls. We removed any leftover authorizations my dad had ever been listed on. We froze my credit, because if a man will cancel a transplant to teach a lesson, he'll absolutely open a credit card in your name to handle something. We documented every payment I'd made to him over the years. The insurance transfers, the emergencies, the repairs, the $1,200, the $950, the little constant leaks that had kept their household afloat while my body fought for its life. When my dad realized I wasn't coming back into the fold, he tried the classic move. He told people I was ungrateful, that I was influenced by my nosy aunt, that my lawyer was making it worse. But the people who mattered had already seen the paperwork, and the ones who still defended him, I learned something important. Some relatives don't want the truth. They want the old system back, because the old system was comfortable for them. So I stopped arguing. When someone texted, "But he's your dad," I replied, "Please contact my lawyer if you have questions," and I sent Priya's office email. Then I muted them. I didn't do it to be petty. I did it because my body had been through enough without carrying other people's denial. My mom tried in her way. She called me crying one night and said, "I didn't know he'd do something like that." I believed she didn't know the exact plan. But I also told her, gently, "You knew he used money and access to control people. You just didn't think he'd use it on me like that." She got quiet. Then she said, "What do you want from me?" And for once, I answered honestly. "I want you to stop asking me to sacrifice myself so you don't have to confront him." That was the last big conversation we had. After that, our relationship became smaller. Not mean, just smaller. Boundaried. Realistic. These days, my life is quieter. I still sell electronics. I moved into a slightly better apartment in Atlanta with a little balcony. Nothing fancy, just mine. I have a tiny herb garden that I somehow keep alive, and I treat that like proof I'm allowed to grow things without someone taking credit. Aunt Lorraine comes over sometimes, and we eat takeout and watch dumb reality TV. She doesn't lecture me. She just exists in my life like a steady lamp. I have a couple friends from work who became my actual support system, the kind who drove me to appointments without making it about themselves. The kind who text, "You good?" and mean it. My dad lost the power he'd built over me for decades. Not because I destroyed him, not because I yelled loudest, but because I stopped participating in the rules that kept me small. There's a moment that sticks with me, and it's not dramatic. It was a Tuesday evening a few months after everything settled into its new shape. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a pen in my hand, signing paperwork that had my name on it, and only my name. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. I looked out at the balcony, at the little pots of basil and mint, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Walking away wasn't revenge. It was survival. Real family is who shows up with respect, not just DNA. And I get to choose who gets a front row seat in my life now. So